So welcome to this evening's continued conversation on integral ecology. Thank you all for being here. My name is Mark Mann. I'm the Director of Program and Institutes here at the Catholic Information Center. The ministry of our center offers opportunities for those who are already Catholic to cultivate a deeper awareness of this way of life. And we also invite seekers from other faiths or no faith tradition at all to dialogue with us about being Catholic. We're a ministry of the Paulist Fathers in service to the Diocese of Grand Rapids. I'm very happy to welcome Sister Damien Marie Savino as our presenter this evening. I would like to offer a reminder about our programs here at the Catholic Information Center. They are open to the public and are donation-based, and so would not be possible without your contribution and that of our friends and associates. Thank you very much. You can also connect with us if you're not already receiving our free weekly newsletter. You can sign up on our website. You can also watch videos on our YouTube channel. This presentation is being recorded this evening and will also be posted to our YouTube channel. And you can also follow us on social media. Your help is a big part of everything we do. And of course, you're welcome to come visit us here at the center. Sister Damien Marie Savino, a Franciscan Sister of the Eucharist, is currently the Dean of Science and Sustainability at Aquinas College in Grand Rapids, Michigan. She received her bachelor degree in science in biogeography from McGill University, a Master of Science degree in soil and plant science from the University of Connecticut, and her Master of Arts degree in theology from the Catholic University of America, and her Ph.D. in civil environmental engineering, also from the Catholic University of America. She's lectured and written widely on Laudato Si and on integral ecology, as well as on the themes related to ecological restoration, resilience theory, ecological health, ecology and theology, and science and faith. As we continue, let's do so in prayer. In the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit, amen. Lord our God, we thank you for revealing yourself to us through the beauty of the created world and in one another. We ask that you strengthen us in your grace, because we are frail and often misunderstand what it truly means to be caretakers of your creation, to be cooperators with you in your unfolding plan of redemption for the whole world. Strengthen us in your grace. Guide us by your wisdom through Jesus Christ, who reigns and lives with you in the unity of the Holy Spirit, one God, forever and ever. Amen.
Amen.
Father, Son, Holy Spirit. Amen. Sister Damien, welcome.
Thank you very much. I'm really happy to be here. And this is a new presentation for me, and I was kind of happy to be challenged into that. So thank you. I thank you, Mark, and also Amanda Koch for arranging the lecture and the details and all the work that's involved in that. So, and I'm very honored to be doing the second lecture. So some of you may have been here last month when Dr. Catherine Wright spoke on integral ecology and Catholic discipleship. She took kind of a theological and aesthetic look at integral ecology, very beautiful. And tonight I'll be looking more at the scientific aspects of integral ecology and how science and integral ecology can work together to really respond to questions of creation care in a meaningful way. So I'm going to share my presentation, and hopefully you can all see it. So Mark, are we okay there?
Not quite yet.
Not seeing it?
Not yet.
Okay, so hang on. Here we go. How's that?
Good. We got
Okay,
it.
good. Okay, so, and I'm calling this Integral Ecology and Science in Laudato Si, Not So Strange Bedfellows. So how will I approach this? First, I'd like to just say a few comments about science in the new evangelization, because I think it's a tool for the new evangelization. So I'd like to bring that up by way of introduction. Then look at science in Laudato Si, and the main scientific issues to which the Pope draws attention in the encyclical. Then I'll move on to integral ecology, what it is according to the encyclical, and how it can partner with science to bring forth some new models of creation care. Then I have a few scientific case studies that I wanted to share in terms of putting integral ecology into practice in a scientific way. And then some conclusions about how the relationship between science and integral ecology and how they could be partners. So let's start with the science for the new evangelization. And I think this is an important point, and there's a beautiful passage in Pope Francis's Evangelii Gaudium, in which he says that science could be a tool for the new evangelization. And I think this is really true. I just wrote a chapter for the 3rd volume of a series on the new evangelization, in which I try to elaborate on this idea. The volume is entitled Global Perspectives on the New Evangelization, and it should be coming out later this year. My thesis in the article is that since we live in a scientific culture, creative engagement of the church with science and technology is an opportunity for us, and that science could be a tool for dialogue and catechesis. And in fact, it could be a strategy for the new evangelization. Because in the new evangelization, there's really a pressing need to listen to others, to meet them where they're at, and to dialogue. And that means, especially with science and with scientists, because science is such a dominating part of our culture. And so the science could be basically an entrance point to the new evangelization. We begin with the science and we allow it to lead us into deeper questions of faith and apologetics. And this, I believe, is the approach that St. Pope Francis takes in Laudato Si. And I'll say more about that in a little bit. So the sciences really could be an asset for the new evangelization. And as he says here, when certain categories of reason and the sciences are taken up into the proclamation of the gospel message, these categories then become tools of evangelization. And so something I think for us to keep in mind in terms of the opportunity that the sciences present for us today. Now, so a little bit more about this. It's certainly not, conclusive, but I'd like to suggest 3 ways that science could be a tool for the new evangelization. First, science can be an entrance point to dialogue. In our scientific culture, people are drawn to science, and ecology is no exception to that. And so science can be a point of unity that brings people together in dialogue, even in a way that religion just can't at this point. Science gets people into the room, basically, and it kind of inspires their interest. Science can also be a medium of relationship for people, as you can see in some of these pictures. And these and many of the photos in my presentation are taken out on our land at the Franciscan Life Process Center in Lowell, Michigan. But I'm sure you've all experienced that when people get together to work on an environmental project or care for creation in some way, their relationships deepen and even a kind of community can form because people share a common love of a place or a resource, and they work together on a common project to restore the resource. And so it's a good medium of relationship for people. And we Franciscan Sisters of the Eucharist find this a great deal in the way that we work with others. And then finally, we want our science to be in service to the common good. And in that way, it can be a very important tool for the new evangelization. We want our science to be a force for the good. And certainly ecological initiatives can help not only Catholics, but all of humanity, as well as the natural world. So they can really become a strong force for the good. Now, science in Laudato Si. It's a pretty impressive encyclical, the Pope's environmental encyclical, the first environmental encyclical in the history of the church that came out in 2015. So first, the Pope says in the introduction that Laudato Si was written for the whole world, not just for Catholics, and that it drew upon the work of numerous scientists, as well as philosophers, theologians, and civic groups around the world. So the Pope consulted scientists in the writing of the document. Then secondly, in the way the encyclical is structured, and I'll go through the basic outline here, the Pope kind of exemplifies a spirit of dialogue between science and religion and the other disciplines as well. He acknowledges ecological questions are a major issue of our day. And I was struck when Catherine Wright was presenting last month. She began with a reference to the Vatican II document Gaudium et Spes, and the theme that runs throughout it of learning to read the signs of the times. And ecological degradation, we could say, is a sign of the times, and we need to address it. So Pope Francis does just that in the first chapter of Laudato Si. And I believe it's deliberate. He begins with the science. He uses science as an entrance point to dialogue about ecological questions and issues and their associated social and political and economic ramifications. After the science comes the theology in chapter 2. And the Pope says that science and theology can engage in intense dialogue, which benefits both. He shares his conviction in this chapter that Catholic theology can contribute to ecology and the full development of humanity. And so therefore, Christians need to realize that their responsibility within creation and their duty toward nature and the Creator are an essential part of their faith. But then in chapter 3, he urges us to look within ourselves for the human roots of the ecological crisis, that ultimately the roots come from inside us, right, in our own disordered attitudes and behaviors. And so we need to examine ourselves and find out where we've gone, where we kind of have a polluted inner ecology. And then that leads to the 4th chapter, kind of the keystone of the encyclical Integral Ecology, the marriage of natural and human ecology, a very comprehensive sense of ecology. And so finding ways to practice integral ecology is, I think, what the Pope is saying is the answer to the ecological crisis, to the scientific issues that are confronting us. Some of these will be macro solutions in politics and economics, and he takes those up in chapter 5. And some will be micro solutions in ecological education and ecological spirituality, which he takes up in chapter 6. So even how the encyclical is organized is kind of a model for how science and integral ecology can come together to address some of the pressing ecological issues of our day. Now, just to look a little bit more at chapter 1, the chapter on the sciences. And the Pope starts out by saying that theological reflections can be kind of tiresome and abstract if they're not grounded in a fresh analysis of the current situation, if they're not grounded in reality, which that's exactly what science can help us do. But the goal of the science is not just to amass information, but it's to help us, as he says so beautifully, to become painfully aware, to turn what is happening in the world into our own personal suffering. And he's asking us to slow down and reflect, not to get caught in what he calls rapidification, meaning the intensified pace of life and work that characterizes contemporary Western culture. He's challenging us to allow the science to penetrate us with its reality so that we can learn to hear the cry of the earth groaning, and allow it to affect us so that we can deepen our capacity to care and then discern what each of us can do to heal the ecological wounds on the planet. So again, the science point is the entrance point and the way that he wants to begin to address questions of environmental degradation. It's the starting point for dialogue. And in this chapter 1, he highlights 4 ecological issues. So it's not a climate change encyclical as was kind of widely reported at the beginning, though the Pope does take climate change very seriously, but he's calling us to a broader vision, a more comprehensive view. Climate change is one of 4 scientific issues identified in chapter 1. So we have pollution, climate change, the issue of water, quantity and quality, and the loss of biodiversity. And these, we need good science to understand what's going on there. but he also wants us to understand them in the context of the decline in the quality of human life that we're experiencing, the problems of global inequity in the distribution, unequal distribution of resources, and the confounding issues of weak responses and diverging opinions. So always in kind of a broader, more comprehensive context. But dialogue with science is very important. And in chapter 5, when he talks about the macro approaches that are needed, he emphasized the major paths of dialogue, and one of those is religions and dialogue with science. Now, when Pope Francis speaks of science, he's not speaking of a reductionistic or materialistic kind of science, but rather a holistic view, and one that allows space for God the Creator to be in the big picture. And he points out in chapter 5 that empirical science can't provide a complete explanation of life. He's very favorable towards science, but he also recognizes its limits. And he says empirical science can't provide a complete explanation because this would breach the limits imposed by its own methodology. So our reason shouldn't be confined just to empirical understanding. This is the perspective he is speaking from, because this leaves out the whole world of aesthetic sensibility. So what we heard from Dr. Wright last month, poetry, our ability to long for and grasp the ultimate meaning and purpose of things, to ask the big questions. So he says any technical solution which science offers, as good as those solutions are, they will be powerless to solve the serious problems of our age if humanity loses its compass, if we lose sight of religion and the great motivations which make it possible for us to live in harmony and to make sacrifices and live together well. So how does he want to approach this dialogue, and what can it do for us, this dialogue between science and religion in relation to care for creation? Well, he says a few things. First, it can spur interreligious dialogue for the sake of protecting nature, as well as defending the poor and building networks of fraternity. It can spur interdisciplinary dialogue between the sciences, as well as dialogue between different ecological movements. And this could help overcome some of the isolation, the absolutization, even ideological conflicts which accompany over a specialization. The purpose of the dialogue for Pope Francis is to get us working together toward the common good, which is really essential if we're going to approach and be able to confront in a meaningful way the really complex social ecological crisis with which we are confronted today. And he says it will help us to grow in patience, in tolerance, in generosity as we learn to dialogue, and that's important, our own personal development. And it will challenge us also to live in a way that's consonant with our faith, and that so that we don't contradict our faith by our actions. And so for Pope Francis, this idea that realities are greater than ideas is very important. So in dialogue, we have to keep that in mind, that realities are greater than ideas. Our ideas need to be connected to reality. And this is where science can help us, because science focuses on reality. And then the Pope says what calls us to action are realities illuminated by reason. And so again, here is the role of science. So the dialogue with science should help spur us to action. And here I'd like to read his words, which are so beautiful. He said, this principle has to do with incarnation of the word, and it's being put into practice. The principle of reality, of a word already made flesh and constantly striving to take flesh anew, is essential to evangelization. At the same time, this principle impels us to put the word into practice, to perform works of justice and charity which make that word fruitful. Not to put the word into practice, not to make it reality, is to build on sand, to remain in the realm of pure ideas, and to end up in a lifeless and unfruitful self-centeredness and Gnosticism. so beautiful that the purpose of the dialogue is to help us better grasp realities, and science helps us with that, and then to do something about the realities, right? To be inspired to act. Okay, so now a little bit on integral ecology. I think this marriage of natural and human ecology was a theme in Pope Benedict's, actually, in his environmental teachings. It's one then that Pope Francis picks up on and extends in Laudato Si through his notion of integral ecology. And this is a kind of comprehensive ecology, that a broader vision of reality, that is a holistic vision of the world around us. And it is grounded in the conviction that human life is grounded in three fundamental and closely intertwined relationships: with God, with our neighbor, and with the earth itself. So, and in this broader conception of reality, God, neighbor, and earth are kind of like our ecosystem, right? Our three prime relationships that are interconnected. And so it's not just God and our neighbor, that's extremely important, but the created world counts too as one of our prime relationships. And that's a big contribution from Laudato Si, so clearly stated in this paragraph 66, but throughout the document. And again, as Catholics, we're fundamentally sacramental people, incarnational people. So this means that matter, the earth, is important to us. It's not divine in itself, but it speaks of the creator. And so living integral ecology in these prime relationships in concrete ways is really essential to living our faith. It's essential to a life of virtue. And the natural ecology, as I said before, can be an entrance point into this whole process, a door through which we can encounter other people and ultimately encounter God. Now here, I'd like to just take a moment to comment on the notion of care and integral ecology and its connection to this notion of care. Care is the subtitle of the encyclical, Care for Our Common Home, and it's a central to the meaning of the encyclical. It's interesting, when I first read the encyclical, I was struck by the fact that stewardship is used hardly ever in the encyclical. It's only used twice, while care is used, I Googled this, 43 times. So, and according to Cardinal Turkson, who was very involved in the preparation of the encyclical, the use of the word care by Pope Francis was purposeful. Care goes beyond stewardship, says the Cardinal. And he says, whereas talk of stewardship implies a relationship based on duty, the notion of care taps into something deeper. When one cares for something, it is something one does with passion and love. And so you can be a steward and not be connected with, in passion and love with what you're stewarding. But if you care, you're connected. You're connected in relationship. You're affected by the thing with which you're in relationship, or the person with whom you're in relationship. And so what the Pope is saying is, I want you to be affected by what's happening to our common home. And so when he's advocating for integral ecology, he's advocating for a kind of care that goes beyond duty and obligation and moves towards real deep changes in attitudes and lifestyles that eventually will influence to change our behaviors. And so the goal is for the integral ecology, through this culture of care, to bring about a true ecological conversion, and in which both human and natural ecology can flourish. So integral ecology is really about building a culture of care, care for God, care for our neighbor, and care for our common home. And the Pope says that St. Francis of Assisi is really his model of care, because he lived out very joyfully and authentically these three prime relationships. And for him, every creature, as we hear in his canticle, was united to him as a brother or a sister, with this kind of sense of affection and care. So these bonds of affection are what united him with others and with the created world. So we want to remember that in our spirit of integral ecology, that underlying it is this culture, this spirit of care. Now, the actual components of integral ecology, as you can see, it's very comprehensive. So it includes environmental ecology, economic ecology, social ecology, cultural ecology, the ecology of daily life, the common good, and inter and intra-generational solidarity. So it's not, integral ecology goes beyond just the scientific ecology, which mostly would be encompassed in environmental ecology. And it includes this comprehensive vision. And each of these is necessary if we're going to build a culture of care for our common home. And not just on the big scale, but how we live care in our daily lives and relationships as well. Okay, so this comprehensive approach, we could kind of call it the Catholic both and. You know, Catholic with a small c means universal. And there's many ways in which our faith, we are really blessed that we have this kind of both and faith. So that the integral ecology includes natural and human ecology, natural science and social science, the connection between the health of ecosystems and human health. It includes the cry of the earth and the cry of the poor. They're connected. And so often when the natural ecology is degraded, so the social ecology suffers. And we have, in our most polluted areas, tend to be in the most impoverished communities or regions of the world. Integral ecology recognizes not only the instrumental goodness, so what we get from creation, what we use it for, but also the intrinsic goodness, that the created world is good in itself. Each species is intrinsically good in its being. And the Pope speaks about this in the chapter on theology, the intrinsic goodness. It also includes the connection between what we might call exterior and interior ecologies. So interior attitudes, as we said before, and exterior behaviors. And this, I was always struck by Pope Emeritus Benedict XVI. When he was a Pope, he said, the external deserts in the world are growing because the internal deserts are so vast. And I think that speaks to this exterior-interior connection. And the idea also that the physical world is the entrance point for us as Catholics into the spiritual world. So because we're sacramental people, matter has great value for us. So the physical world is very important to us. We're not here to just live in some kind of spiritual realm. We interact with the physical world. So that means we interact with creation. And it actually can be an entrance point to deeper spiritual growth and community. So in the mindset of integral ecology, as it's presented in Laudato Si, creation is something more than inert nature. It's a book with a certain grammar or set of rules embedded in it by the creator. And in paragraph 85, he writes that creation is a precious book whose letters are the multitude of created things present in the universe. Nature is a constant source of wonder and awe from which no creature is excluded. It's also a continuing revelation of the divine. And so in this kind of integrated view, science is actually itself even more than just the study of matter or the study of ecology. It's actually, we could say, the practice of learning how to read the book of creation. And the great Franciscan theologian, St. Bonaventure, whose work I'm very fond of, would say that the vestiges of God are imprinted on creation like footprints, and they're beckoning us to look beyond them to the author of the footprints, beckoning us from the secondary causes, which is really the scientific enterprise, the study of secondary causes, beckoning us to the primary cause, which is God. And so if creation is a book that's constantly speaking to us, we need to learn to listen to its message. And in short, we need to learn to read the book of creation and to teach others how to do that. And so I thought it might be instructive just to look at the encyclical and how I might project that the Pope is reading some messages from creation. And so one that he speaks about constantly throughout the encyclical is the notion of interconnectedness. That's written throughout the book of creation. Because, as he says, the environmental crisis is a relational crisis. Nothing is isolated in this world around us. All creatures are part of a network of relationships. And this is what ecology teaches us. And so we're not faced with separate crises like a natural crisis and a social crisis. We have one complex crisis that's both social and environmental. We have the cry of the earth and the cry of the poor. They're interconnected. As I said before, the ecosystem health and human health, all of those interconnections. Also, the book of creation is always teaching us how creation functions, how the natural world functions. And that's what ecology, the science of ecology, studies. And so he refers to these ecosystem functions. He says, we need only recall how ecosystems interact in dispersing carbon dioxide, purifying water, controlling illnesses and epidemics, forming soil, breaking down waste, and many other ways which we overlook or simply do not know about. So he says, when we speak of sustainable use, consideration must always be given to each ecosystem's regenerative ability in its different areas and aspects. And I think that idea of the regenerative ability of ecosystems is very important. And when you look at how, through the study of ecology, how ecosystems function, you're constantly struck by that, the cycling and the regenerative ability of ecosystems, which unfortunately we've short-circuited by some of our practices and the way that we have polluted ecosystems or treated the land unsustainably. And then I think he mentions quite a bit throughout this notion of intrinsic and instrumental values. So creation, the created world is good in itself, therefore deserves our respect, and therefore loss of biodiversity is an extremely important issue. It's also instrumental. We have to eat, we have to harvest various resources. So this instrumental and intrinsic value are written in the book of creation, I think. And then the idea that local ecology is very important. So we have to know the ecology of our place. That's where we live, and we're place-based people. And in this kind of integrated look of natural and social ecology, we need to know the local peoples of the place. And that might mean learning the indigenous customs and cultures of a place, certainly learning the cultural values of a place, along with the ecological values. More and more, we humans live in cities, so there's a whole urban ecology. And the photo here on the left of the bird is in downtown in Grand Rapids underneath the bridges. The great, and I'm spacing right now on, isn't that terrible? But and so in the urban, there's a whole urban ecology in our cities where more and more people are living. And then finally, this idea of intergenerational ecology, that there needs to be a sharing of ecologies, a sharing of cultures across generations, and an ability to hand down some of the native arts and canning and growing food to the younger generations, and to care about what happens to the generations after us. Pope Francis says very beautifully, we have received a garden from God. We cannot leave a desert to our children. So now let's just look now into putting integral ecology into practice. These are the 4 areas that are highlighted in chapter 1. And you could say I would say for some of the universities, this could be a research platform in the sciences for Laudato Si. So work on pollution, climate change, water issues, and biodiversity, huge areas of need for all of humanity, both locally and globally. Work on them in the spirit of sound science, but also looking for solutions that are integral, that benefit both the natural ecological communities and the human communities. And so in relation to pollution and climate change, he talks about them being an outgrowth of this throwaway culture, which again has an interior element or a human element because it affects the excluded in terms of people just as quickly as it reduces things to rubbish, he says. So we can throw people away like waste, just as we throw away things. And I do try to talk about this with my students to help them understand maybe how what we do exteriorly affects our interior attitudes and our behaviors. Then with water issues, he speaks about issues of quality, polluted water, and quantity, and also concerns over the privatization of water, which we live with those concerns here in the Great Lakes region. And then loss of biodiversity. This has 10 paragraphs devoted to us in the encyclical, so more than any of the other science issues, even climate change. And so this idea of the intrinsic value of species, and he says, because of us, thousands of species will no longer give glory to God by their very existence, nor convey their message to us. So again, the grammar of creation, we need to preserve creatures in their intrinsic goodness so they can give glory to God and so they can speak to us. And are we listening for their message, or have we become deaf to it? And their message, if we really do come to learn the message of creation, can show us what to do to better care for them. Or he says, are we substituting an irreplaceable and irretrievable beauty with something we have created ourselves? So I think in the way that he approaches the sciences and putting integral ecology into practice, he's showing how we can have them be dialogue partners. So integral ecology can't really progress well without science, needs to know how these systems function. But at the same time, science needs to be oriented toward the common good, toward integral ecology, so that its solutions are benefiting both the natural and the human ecologies, so that we're searching for win-win solutions. And so in the next case studies, I'd like to just show you some examples where I think we do have science and integral ecology working together hand in hand and coming up with some win-win solutions. So first, I'm going to, this is a case study done by a researcher at the University of Notre Dame who's working on the problem of schistosomiasis in Senegal. And so I'm going to stop sharing so I can share this short video, which shows a little bit about his work. And hopefully I can get this to come up. Here we go. Okay.
There's no such thing as a simple solution to a complex global problem. Take schistosomiasis, for example.
Schistosomiasis is second only to malaria as the most devastating parasitic disease in the world.
It affects over 250 million people each year, and it is taking the life of thousands of our children.
There is medication to treat schistosomiasis, but with a high rate of reinfection and limited access to healthcare, University of Notre Dame professor Jason Rohr is working to prevent the disease from taking hold in the first place.
It's so difficult to combat schistosomiasis because the way it spreads is so complicated.
Infection occurs when someone comes into contact with fresh water that's been contaminated.
Excess fertilizer runs off the landscape into fresh water, increasing the available habitat for freshwater snails.
And those snails carry the parasite that actually infect the local population, causing gastrointestinal illness, prolonged infection, and even multiple types of cancer.
In partnership with Senegalese organizations EPLS and SIA, Professor Rohr's team is utilizing drone and spectral photography to identify new vegetation growth and developing economic solutions to ensure its removal.
We knew if we could reduce the vegetation, the snails and the parasites would decline, reducing human infections.
And we convert the vegetation into compost, animal feed, and even cooking gas.
This system benefits the local economy and can be sustained by the community.
It's a big solution that we believe can save lives throughout the developing world.
The University of Notre Dame asks, what would
Could you all hear that okay? Okay.
Yeah, it was just fine.
Okay, good. So I think that gives an example of really he had to do the science to figure out how the infection was spreading, but he's very clear as a scientist in saying, I can't really help this situation unless I engage with the local communities, because otherwise they keep just spreading it. And so when we leave, they have to know how to handle this. And so it really needs to be a solution that's both integral for the science and integral for the human communities there. Then in relation to climate change, I think this is interesting, and the whole idea of regenerative agriculture. And it's important for growing food for the future because we're going to have more and more people to feed, but doing it in a way that's actually benefiting ecosystems and not degrading them. And also that is capturing carbon. And so there's a lot of interest now in this kind of regenerative agriculture, even specifically for issues of climate change as well, because soils with vegetation on them can capture a huge amount of carbon. So in the degenerative model, which is primarily how we are working today, we're actually losing soil. We're losing soil, organic soil, and also fertility of soil. In the regenerative model, we're building up soil and building up fertility as well. And there's a very good film called Kiss the Ground that kind of introduces you to this movement. I'd like to, this is just an excerpt that I'd like to share with you. Whoops. If I can get it to come up okay. So sorry to have to fiddle with the Zoom. If I was in there, I could just play it directly with you. Okay.
The agriculture industry has suffered a $1.8 billion loss over the last 4 years.
Drought and extreme heat have made this a very busy fire season.
The drought we're in is disastrous.
80% of all antibiotics sold are used unnecessarily on livestock.
Commercial livestock accounts for about half of the greenhouse gases that contribute to climate change.
We haven't been this dry in decades.
CAFO, a concentrated animal feeding operation, set up to maximize efficiency and profit regardless of the cost. This type of livestock production is one of the most resource-intensive practices on the planet. It's been made possible through massive taxpayer subsidies, but the true cost is enormous. Drought, desertification, carbon emissions, dead zones, disease. We know this. The CAFO is degenerative, meaning when we look at the big picture, it is continuously degrading the ecosystems that it relies on. At the end of the day, to be truly economical and efficient, farming needs healthy ecosystems. After seeing just how degenerative CAFO ranching is, I started researching if there is a truly regenerative way of ranching cattle. I found Dr. Alan Williams, who is known for doing just that. He's pioneered a relatively unknown approach to ranching that's hugely profitable, efficient, all while regenerating the ecosystem and environment. It's called regenerative ranching. I set off to Bibb County, Alabama to meet him and see his regenerative ranch with my own eyes.
I consider Alan to be the grass-fed guru of our generation right now. I don't know if he'd appreciate that, but that's what I've been thinking of him as.
So the cows are going through another move today, and this is what high-density grazing is all about, multiple moves a day. With regenerative grazing, we mimic what the bison once did by building appropriately sized paddocks each day that allow us to graze hundreds of cattle across each paddock. Once the cattle have eaten some of the grass, trampled some, and fertilized the area, they are immediately moved to the next paddock and then the next. This practice produces profound results that prevent overgrazing and promote tremendous fertility and growth. If we focus first and foremost on the soil and restoring that soil function and biology, then everything else comes much easier.
So the important thing that differentiates between dirt and soil is soil organic matter, right?
Yes.
And soil organic matter is actually 50% carbon, which means if we're regenerating and rebuilding soil, we're actually putting carbon into the ground. Now, I've been told, and we've read in books, that it takes hundreds to thousands of years to build back soil. How quick are you doing it here?
We're able to build new soil organic matter at the rate of 0.5 to 1% annually.
Let's put some perspective on this. A 0.4% increase of soil organic matter on the world's agricultural soils would completely negate all current CO2 emissions. Alan is increasing his soil organic matter by 0.5% or 1% every year.
If we add just 1 more percent soil organic matter, that means that every single acre can hold another 25,000 gallons of water. Ready?
Go.
So we just did our water infiltration test and found that it took only 4 seconds to infiltrate the first ½ inch of water. That means we're keeping our water here, right here. When you contrast that with the average farm and ranch across North America, the average water infiltration rate is less than 1/2 inch an hour. So 2 things are happening to that water that's sitting on top of the surface now. One is that you're going to have a percentage of it that's going to evaporate, and then the second is you're going to have a higher percentage that's actually going to run off. It's going to carry with it topsoil to the effect of 4 tons plus per acre annually. You've got a lot of nitrates and phosphates that are leaving your soil and going downstream. They're going into our rivers, into our bays, into our gulfs, into our lakes, and creating significant issues.
Adjacent to Alan's farm is a soy field that exemplifies degenerative agriculture.
This is one of the major reasons why CAFO systems are so degenerative, because this is where the feed comes from. Look at this soil. It is literally turning to dust, and we're losing probably 4 tons to 10 tons of topsoil per acre per year on this type of agriculture. We could convert this land, this vast amount of land, could be easily converted to start feeding cattle. Instead of shipping all this soy thousands of miles to those feedlots, why don't we just do it?
Book with confidence at Booking.com, the world's leading online travel agency.
Take it right here.
Without using any imported water, feed, fertilizer, or pesticides, Alan has increased his production 5-fold in the last 3 years.
We keep passing these ranches that look way more depleted than Alan's ranch. So, Alan, we're driving past tons of ranches on the way here, and they have way less grass than you.
What we're looking at here, we have easily 3.5 times more forage growing per acre. I can carry 3.5 times more cows on the same 5,000 acres, which means more net profit.
So many people have the misconception that to do good for the environment, you can't make a lot of money. Alan's model completely turns this upside down. Then, of course, it begs the question, why aren't all farmers and ranchers doing that? So I asked Alan, and he was just like, simply, Finn, it's just because people don't know.
We know what we can do, and we know how profound this impact is, not just on the farmers and ranchers themselves and their quality of life and their ability to make a good living, but also on the rural economies surrounding these farms and ranches. We can rebuild our ecosystem, our degraded soils and our degraded water cycles. That's what excites me. And we're creating opportunity to bring young people back into agriculture, young people that have a hunger and a thirst to be able to achieve these things. So that's what I strive to do. That's what we live for every day now.
Sorry, here we go. Okay. So I think, hang on. So. So I think that's a pretty strong case, and it's something that certainly we live in an area with a lot of farms, but those of us also in our yards can do this by keeping vegetation on the ground, not having a lot of open area, not having a lot of paved areas, and basically just letting the soil and the plants that grow on it regenerate the land. And again, going back to that regenerative capacity of ecosystems and mimicking the patterns that are there in our ecosystems and those ecological patterns that science discovers, and then they become the basis for an integral ecology that benefits the human and the natural ecology. Then in the case of water, there's a case in Arcata, where the city of Arcata needed a new wastewater treatment plant, and they decided to create wetlands to treat their waste. And it's a success story. They've been doing this for at least 30 years, if not 40 years now. And so I wanted to share this, and this clip comes from a series that I did with Salt and Light Television, a Catholic Canadian TV station, on why we should care for creation. And we used this case study as one of the examples of integral ecology. So you'll see in here that it talks to me about me being at the University of St. Thomas. That was in a previous life before I came to Aquinas.
It's very cost effective because the main energy we use is solar energy. And then it also provides a lot of wildlife habitat, provides a lot of open space, and we allow people to come and recreate in the marshes. So, you know, a normal treatment plant, they're not very attractive for people to come and visit. People don't really want to go and recreate at the wastewater treatment plant, whereas here, the community really comes and uses our area. It's an important recreational area for the city. We also have a lot of educational things going on here where we work with Humboldt State University and have students doing research down here. And then we have birds that nest here in the spring. And then this is an important stopover on the Pacific Flyway for migratory waterfowl. And 2 years ago, we were having the extreme drought. And normally there's lots of flooded areas and natural marshes, and they were all dried out, but our marsh was all green and verdant. The people that like the birds were really happy that we were here because we were, a resource for the migratory birds to stop in and kind of fuel up and get energy before they continue on.
And so treating wastewater became an opportunity for restoring the environment.
Arcata had a problem. They need a bigger wastewater treatment plant. There's economic implications for that. There's environmental implications. They got together and they were able to actually dialogue, which is very important. And instead, they came up with a new idea of let's use the existing plant, but run our wastewater through a wetland and use the natural rhythms in the wetland to actually break down our waste. And so now they've got a win-win. Rather than a fighting, they've got a win-win. The human and the natural ecology are both flourishing. But that came out of their, first of all, being aware of what the issue was and being able to dialogue about it, and then being willing to try something different, to take a risk.
I would say that what we need is what I would call the ecological virtues. That is virtues which will help us treat the natural world aright. So the first one I would say is humility. A proper humility towards the amazing natural order, and also humility before the Creator God. The next one I would say is love. And so learning then to love and cherish those creatures that share our planetary home. And then the third one I would say is one that Pope Francis emphasized a lot, and that is joy. And in addition to that, I'll add justice. The justice towards one another, so not splitting off our care of creation from the care of other people, especially those who are living in the most deprived areas of the world. Women in particular, I would say eco-justice is another area. By that I mean the extinction of other species, the fact that many species are no longer existing, and then finally my favorite one is prudence or practical wisdom. It's one that includes deliberation, judgment, and action.
To be a mediator, you're in the middle, and when we're in upright posture as a human person with our feet on the ground, but yet able to look forward and to look up, we are, in a sense, a conduit for that creation to get back to God. As human mediators, we are not only a conduit, but we are the means of reconciliation, which means we need to look at ourselves, right? And with the Arcata case, you have many levels of reconciliation because you have, first of all, the problem of waste. But instead of it being a negative something, the waste became a resource. So the natural rhythms in the plants, the grammar of those wetlands, and those wetlands are meant to break down waste, right? Because there's no waste in nature. So we give the nature that waste and it becomes a resource. And then finally, the case of the question of biodiversity, the fourth area of science in the encyclical. And here I thought I could come close to home to mention a place on our own land at the Franciscan Life Process Center, which used to be a hay field, and we were no longer using it as a hay field, so decided to make it into a prairie, to restore it into a prairie. It began in 2014 as an Eagle Scout project, and we dedicated it in 2017 and decided to call it the Laudato Si Sanctuary. Laudato Si for obvious reasons, and then sanctuary, we chose that word because it's a sanctuary for wildlife, for the prairie plants and the various birds and insects and butterflies that are coming back there. But it's also a sanctuary for people. There are nature trails there, and a lot of people like to come through and meditate or run or walk through the sanctuary. It also solved a number of ecological issues that we had. So we had a very bad case of garlic mustard, which is an invasive species, and that has completely disappeared since the prairie plants have taken over. We also had a situation of flooding downstream of this field, and now it is great. The flooding has been greatly reduced because the prairie, as you saw in the film on regenerative agriculture in that clip, the prairie and the grasses take up a lot of water. So we've now helped with, and we no longer have the flooding downstream that we once had. So I think this, these kinds of efforts and restoring prairies is something that we did as a religious community, but you could do this in your backyard. There are many ways that you can also capture the regenerative aspects of the ecology of your local place, and promote this kind of integral ecology, which benefits the land, but also benefits the people who live on the land and who use the land. And so finally, by way of conclusion, I'd like to speak just a little bit, again, broadly about science and integral ecology as partners, first in dialogue, in relationship, and then in service. So in dialogue, Pope Francis never tires of encouraging us to dialogue, so that's extremely important for him. But I think many people don't really understand what he means by dialogue. And for him, dialogue has to be very grounded in our own interior convictions. So we have to have a strong sense of where we stand before we come into dialogue with others. And then he uses this term contrapositions, and he contrasts it with the idea of contradictions. So contrapositions, he says, are two poles that are held in tension. And they might seem to be opposite, but they're fruitful. It's a creative tension with a contraposition. And creation is full of these. So that he mentions local, global, whole, part, horizon, limit. And that is a favorable something. But he says we often get caught in our dialogue with a conflictual spirit of contradictions. And we have two temptations, he says, either on the one hand, to get caught in a contradiction. So it's either one side or the other side, and I'm going to stand with this side. Or another temptation we have, if we get afraid of that conflict, is, okay, well, I'm going to deny the tension. I'm not even going to get involved in it, right? So in the one, he says, you know, we're exacerbating the conflict by becoming more conflictual. In the other, we're avoiding engaging in the conflict altogether and kind of washing our hands of it. And he says, on the contrary, in true dialogue, we act as reconcilers. And so we endure the conflict, facing it head on in a sense of contrapositions, understanding the tension there. And by discerning, we see beyond the surface reasons for the disagreement. And we open ourselves to the possibilities for a new synthesis, one that doesn't destroy either pole, but preserves what is good and valid in a new perspective. And this is a breakthrough. This is a gift of dialogue. And that's what he is praying for in this kind of, this sense of integral ecology. And I think that a dialogue between science and integral ecology could help us if we're able to dialogue in this way. That's a very strong sense of dialogue. We might come to some of these overflow solutions that are just something new coming out of what seem to be conflictual positions. Then in relationship, so science and integral ecology in relationship, I love this photo. This is an EcoLink bridge in Singapore, and it's not for people, it's for animals. So they can cross this busy highway because it's encroaching into a nature reserve. So, and I thought it was an interesting image of science and integral ecology in partnership, acting as a bridge. So that as we dialogue in this kind of mystery of contraposition and coming to new synthetic solutions, we grow in relationship with one another. We grow to appreciate each other more, and we get in a bigger perspective. So I think integral ecology can challenge science to broader thinking, so the science doesn't get caught into kind of a narrow perspective or thinking that it has the whole answer. Integral ecology can help science from kind of closing in on itself and pushes it out into service of others. But integral ecology is so big and broad and somewhat perhaps nebulous that science gives it that entrance point, you know, the place to step into the ocean, a particular place to do a restoration project or restore a polluted water body or rebuild a farm. So science grounds integral ecology in reality, not just ideas, but concrete situations which require attention, healing, and care. And then I think finally, science in service. And here I wanted to end with this slide and mention the Laudato Si action platform, which some of you I'm sure know about, but if you don't, I thought it was a good final slide to segue. It's a unique collaboration between the Vatican and International Coalition of Catholic Organizations and all people, really. And it's an effort to empower all to take decisive action to put Laudato Si into practice. So to put the principles of integral ecology into practice over a 7-year period, which will require, of course, science, good science, to help us know how to put it into practice. And so Pope Francis, when he introduced the Laudato Si action platform, he said, we need a new ecological approach, which transforms our way of living in the world, our lifestyles, our relationships with the Earth's resources, and in general, the way we look at people and live our life. An integral human ecology, which involves not only environmental considerations, but people as a whole, becomes capable of listening to the cry of the poor and being a leaven for a new society. And so we could talk more about this in the Q&A, but through the platform now, which will officially open, I think, next week on the 14th, or this Sunday, on the 14th of November, it's a 7-year journey to encourage different sectors to progress toward integral ecology through these 7 goals that are pictured on the slide. So through adopting a simple lifestyle, through ecological education, ecological spirituality, community engagement, responding to the cry of the earth and the cry of the poor, and a new kind of circular economics, ecological economics. And so I think I will stop here just with this sense of science and integral ecology in dialogue, in relationship, and in service. And with this idea of the Laudato Si action platform might be something, because it's for schools, it's for families, it's for businesses, it's for universities. So any of us can participate in this as a way that perhaps we can put this science and integral ecology into action over the next 7 years. So I think I'll stop sharing my screen now, and maybe we can have a little discussion if you have any questions.
Feel free to raise your hand if you have a question, and it'll move you up to the top. Lorraine has a question, and I know Dan had put a question in the chat, as did Sister Joyce Ann, but Lorraine, why don't you go ahead and then I'll cover what's in the chat.
Thank you. Thank you. Sister Damien, I just loved what you had to say about science. I am just so eager for our church to really embrace science, and the Laudato Si platform. In fact, this was very good to hear this tonight, because we're trying to put the Laudato Si platform into action through our archdiocese in Minneapolis and St. Paul. And I hadn't really before tonight as strongly thought about the science, but it is a science in each of these. I think there's 7 categories.
Yes.
But I think in each of them, I'd like to hear you say even more about how we can use studies, facts of science to help make these Laudato Si platform issues come alive.
Yeah, and that's a wonderful question. Thank you for that. And I don't know if I had thought directly about how the science would apply to each one of the goals. It's certainly the cry of the earth, so that's all of ecology right there, you know. Right. And we need to be really sharp in our ecology. And thankfully, we just have some amazing work happening now in the ecological realm. But response to the cry of the poor, now that, well, first of all, health. So the whole, even the pandemic, there was so much science involved in that, and in the connections, and we know now there's so many connections between human health and environmental health. And it's documented on, I mean, there's just in many different ways in relation to agriculture, urban areas. I mean, there's so many connections, and that, so that's a very strong science connection in terms of health. There's also just, I guess you would say, understanding the science of how in urban areas. So when I did my dissertation, I was looking at the Anacostia River in DC, and I was at that time also very interested in the connection between people and place. And it was very clear early on, the degradation of the river corresponded with the degradation of the human communities. Living on the east side of the river, it was all, a lot of them were freed slaves. It was African-American communities, some of the poorest communities in the city. And they had used to have a strong community life. And then as the river degraded, highways were put in that split up their communities, waste was dumped, all of the waste was dumped directly from DC into that river, not into the Potomac where the wealthier people were living. So the whole, and it's kind of, it is sort of a science story of how the correlation between those ecological and human communities, it's such a strong correlation. Ecological economics, I mean, there's a whole movement out now for more circular economics, and how we use our resources those are scientific questions, right? And how we extract our resources. So, and this, your question is so good. It really deserves a lot more thought. I'm just trying to think as I'm answering this, but certainly resource extraction, mining is huge. Are there other ways to mine? And it's only going to get huger because of electronics. We need all the metals from electronics. So are there ways to extract these resources and make it economical, in ecological kind of economics though? That's got to be grounded in good science. So we're not degrading the systems as we're extracting the resources. Simple lifestyles, maybe most of us we don't want to be scientists living at home, but there's so much simple science involved in composting, how we growing our own vegetables, growing our own food. So I think there would be ways of looking at certainly ecological education. If you're interested in education, the Pope is very strong on calling for new ways of education. And I think we have an opportunity here. We really need to get some new kind of hands-on education that's very based in field experiences and hands-on experiences, or lab experiences too.
Yeah.
And then spirituality, well, here, the whole dialogue between science and religion needs to be strengthened, because they're partners too, and they both bring a lot to each other. And I think that could help undergird our ecological spirituality with a real solid foundation if science and religion were at the base of it. I'm trying to do a lot of this in my talk, so that's why I was glad that Mark asked me to do something on science and integral ecology. Then the community engagement, I think you could see that maybe with the situation in Senegal, where he was actually engaging these local communities with the scientific solutions, that's absolutely essential in the whole idea of a local connection there, local engagement. So those are just some preliminary thoughts, but I love your question. It's going to encourage me to think more about this. And I would encourage all of you, because you'll come up with creative ideas now, having that question kind of guiding you. So
I loved your answer.
Oh, thank you. I'm excited you're here from Minneapolis. That's awesome. Thank you for coming.
Yes. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Lorraine. And you said you're part of a creation care team there at your parish?
Oh, yes, St. Thomas More Parish in St. Paul, Minnesota. I headed up that group for about 7 years, and now I'm with the Archdiocese of St. Paul, Minneapolis, working with the Care for Creation team, and we're trying to start these teams in the parishes throughout the Archdiocese. So this is all very excellent to be hearing this tonight. Thank you, Sister Damien.
Oh, you're welcome. Thank you. I will pray for you in that work. It's important.
Thank you. We need it.
Yeah, very much.
Yeah, I know here in the diocese, there's a few creation care teams in the Diocese of Grand Rapids that are just getting started. There's one at the cathedral that people can check out. And I'm not sure other parishes. David, you're at St. Thomas? Is there a creation care team there? You're muted, David, sorry.
Not yet.
I like the word yet, not yet. Got it.
Well, we're starting small. We have a Sacred Grounds project that we're just getting underway, which is a program through the Lower Grand River Organization of Watersheds and the National Wildlife Foundation to bring habitat into places of faith to kind of make this connection. So it's a tiny little step, but it's kind of bridging the gap between the parish and the community, the larger community in the city.
Great.
Yeah, it's a beautiful work. David does a lot of work with landscapes, making landscapes more sustainable and in light of integral ecology.
Awesome. Dan Pearson had a couple of questions, actually. I think he wants to start a prairie in his own front yard. I don't know what his neighbors would think, but I'm excited to watch the development of it. And but he also asked, and Dan, you can go ahead and just ask your questions, but about the definition of integral ecology, and then about related to Sister's mentioning about simpler lifestyles and about lawn care. Go ahead.
Okay. Can you hear me now? Am
Yeah,
I on?
yeah.
Okay. Yep. Sister Damien, what is a simple definition of integral ecology?
I would say the simplest is natural plus human ecology. So the marriage of natural and human ecology.
Oh, the marriage of natural and human ecology.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you. And I live in suburbia. I live in Forest Hills. We have a front yard and a backyard, and we have lawn care. What does all of this mean? How should we be more attentive to regenerative lawn care, I guess I would say?
Yeah. Now, well, okay, so yeah, I don't know what are you in a neighborhood association? Or
Semi. I mean, you know, we don't have, there's not many rules, but there's some.
Okay.
Not much, yeah.
So I think people maybe don't realize how beautiful the prairie landscapes can be. They're also a lot easier to care for. So you don't have to mow your grass, mow your prairie every week, right? In our prairie, we mow it twice a year, in the fall and the spring, and we will be burning it. I guess it's been, so we probably should have burned it last year, but anywhere 5 to 7 years, we burn it. Now, you couldn't do that in your yard, but there are people like in East Grand Rapids here who have little prairies just along the sidewalk in the front of their homes. And you can plant, so a prairie has all kinds of grasses and forbs, they say. So you can put wildflowers in it, and the grasses themselves are rather pretty too. But yeah, you can get mixes. The Natural Resources Conservation Service, my light was going to go, I could see it. They sell, certain packages, mixes of prairie seeds that you can put down. So I would say in a neighborhood, so as not to upset your neighbors, if you have neighbors of that persuasion, you might want to plant it in a particular formation. So you could have some in circular shape, and David might be able to help you with this design since he's a landscape architect, but maybe rather you could do it. And so you can build up bit by bit, but, or if you have a front walkway, you could put it on both sides of the walkway and then in the front of the house, and then maybe, in some kind of configurations in the lawn. The goal really would be to move away from lawns. We fertilize them, all that nitrogen and phosphorus, it's over fertilized generally, and it's washing into the waterways and causing all kinds of issues, and which are only getting more severe. So whatever we can do to cut down fertilizer runoff would be hugely helpful right now in this country.
That would be a very basic first step, what we could do.
Yeah, and you can buy these, little packages where they'll give you a nice configuration of wildflowers and grasses, and they're not expensive to buy. And if you need to, you could build a little area around to make it into like a flower bed if you feel like your neighbors would be okay with that. And in your backyard, you could probably just make it and put a little pass through and a few benches to sit at. It's amazing how beautiful it is. And it really attracts birds and butterflies, so not that difficult to do, really.
Thank you. Yeah. I know where my consultants are.
Yes, you've got a few here.
Yeah.
Sister Joyce Ann had a question about the contrapositions versus contradictions.
Yes. Well, Sister Damien, I loved your clips that you brought, both of Kiss the Ground and then your practical experience with the different, and I think if we can just think of that regenerative idea that, wasn't it when we did the sweetgrass, braiding sweetgrass, and Robin said, what you take, you have to give back. And so how can you do that? So I loved the quote that you had for, you actually documented every quote that you had in there, but I looked for the one for that contrapositions versus contradictions. And I wondered if that was in Laudato Si, or yes, Nancy is saying, yes, it is there.
Actually,
okay.
I believe that is, and hang on,
because it could have been in another document. That's all I was thinking, but I know how to find them on the Vatican. I just go Pope Francis.
And I actually think that is in his book, his latest book. Let me see if I have it here. Yeah. Let Us Dream.
Oh, okay.
It's a beautiful book. It's an interview with him. And this is where I first confronted this. Now, he may have since used it in other settings, but it's in this Let Us Dream.
Okay.
And he has some really wonderful comments in there about how we are to dialogue. So I did take it from there. So
Right. Well, and I also wanted to end up adding in, so the goats at Aquinas,
yeah,
they're just that exact same kind of thing about regenerative. And I thought, well, that was moving them from one pasture, one paddock, or whatever he was talking about. That's on the ranch terms, but one place to another place. And I thought that made local news. So,
yes,
you know, I think we take first steps, and you did that at Aquinas. So,
yeah, and you have to. I think I believe it was the reach. Well, in a couple of the clips, they talked about taking a risk, or why don't people change since this works so well? It's hard to break through that. I don't know what you call it. I like to call it like an institutional inertia or something. We tend to think we can't do it. And with the GOAT project, this took us like 2 years to get this going. Of course, we had COVID in between, but we had to get special permissions from the city. That was a very slow process. A lot of documentation had to be provided. And so it was kind of discouraging, to be honest, at some points, but we have to have the perseverance. Now we've done it, so now we can do it again. And it was very successful the way the goats came in and ate out some of the invasives. We had to choose the areas properly. So we did have to do some science, because you don't want them to eat up the good things too. But so thank you for, I think that comment is important. We do have to start small. And that's why Dan's question too about in your yard. And what I always say to my students or my sustainability director here at Aquinas, if it doesn't work, we'll try something else. I mean, this is how we learn. So we cannot let this fear of failure or whatever, slow us down. I think we got to be a little bold, give it a try.
And I think on an interview with Bill Gates, he said, okay, innovate. We have a chance to change this around yet. We've got time, but innovation, you don't want to say, I want to try 1 or 2 projects. You got to try lots of projects because some are going to fail, but move ahead because there are projects that will accomplish that regenerative carbon capture and all of that. So
no, that's very beautiful, sister. Yeah. And I think one thing we found with the prairie, once we got through that initial thing of can we really do this, it was so much easier because now we're expanding it a little bit every year, it's basically a 9-acre field and we've got maybe, I'd say 1/4 to 1/3 of it in the prairie. And once it took off, once you tap into the natural rhythms, it just took over. And now the prairie wildflowers are seeding themselves, kind of all over the place. And it really isn't much work for us, but we had to do that initial work. So thank you. Thanks for your comments. That was great.
Thank you.
Does anyone else have any other questions or comments or insights? Nancy. Oh, Nancy and then David.
Sister, I wondered if you had a sense of when the Laudato Si action platform rolls out in about 10 days, I think. Do you envision it focusing on one of those, the petals of the flower I looked at, one area for 1 year and then adding another one in, or is that your sense of how it's going to work?
Not really, no. I think it will, so it's for 7 years, 7 different sectors and 7 goals. So you will, so if say you're coming in as a family, you want to be a Laudato Si family and join the platform, you would sign up and put your name in, and there will be a place on the website that you'll sign up. And then you'll work on a general plan, and they're trying very hard to make it be flexible because we're dealing with people from all over the world, right? So I'm on a subgroup for the universities, and we've got the poorest universities and places in the middle of Africa and the Philippines, and then we've got universities all over the States and Europe. Everybody has sort of different capacities and needs. So the idea is there won't be constraints as to what you say you're going to do for ecological economics. You can choose that yourself, but you should have some markers for each of the 7 goals. And you can have them be simpler for the first couple of years, and then, bigger vision for the last few years. So it'll be, and the reason is those 7 goals came directly from the encyclical, and they're, fairly comprehensive in terms of what is needed to get toward this kind of integral ecology. And what the hope is, if we have tons of millions of people around the world in all these different sectors working on this for 7 years, we might actually really make a difference. But you'll be able to decide how you go about that 7-year process, but you need to address all 7 goals as you're working on it. So it will take thinking, but what a wonderful thing to work on together. I mean, talk about building human community. I think it could be great. I'm really hoping maybe the diocese will, and our diocese maybe in Grand Rapids would want to get involved. I know at Aquinas we're looking at getting involved as a university. I know our religious community, the Franciscan Sisters of the Eucharist, we've decided we're going to sign up for it as a religious community. But you'll be given, some leeway. It won't be a rigid system of what you have to do to reach ecological economics or ecological education, or so.
Yeah, I know that there is a diocesan committee, Laudato Si diocesan committee, and I know they're exploring some of those options. Ellie, here in the Diocese of Grand Rapids, probably similar to what's happening over in Minneapolis. And Nancy, in my mind, I'm not surprised. I mean, it's an integral approach. It follows suit with integral ecology. It's kind of going all together. David, you had a comment or a question.
Yeah.
Well, I know we're sort of at the end of the allotted time, and it's probably a larger topic, and maybe I'm not sure even a fully formed question, but it seems to me in promoting and working with a lot of these practices that we're looking at tonight in my work and with alliances that I have, and it seems like the biggest challenge and obstacle is around the ecological economics, really the economics side. I know that, for example, farm policy in the US and now globally really drives a lot, the vast majority of what's done, even when, I mean, farmers pretty much do what they need to and what they're told to in terms of where the subsidies are basically, making it possible. And so so part of it is certainly awareness, but a bigger part of it has to do with evolving economies in a way that are multi-benefit and win-win, like some of the examples that Sister Damien shared. And so that's, I guess, and it seems like without these, and I liked the clip on with the woman talking about ecological virtues, because without humility and love and basically dying to self for the benefit of others and these virtues, it's hard to see decision makers and those that are actually ultimately making decisions around what drives these things to come to ecological solutions.
I know. I think you're right. Economics is a big one, and I don't have any easy answers there. And we need specialists in economics and politics, policymakers. But one thing that might just be of interest or give you some hope, this whole economy of Francesco movement that Pope Francis has, the young people, it was supposed to occur in Assisi, but during COVID, they couldn't actually be there, but they did have the speakers kind of speaking from there. And it was only for people, I think the oldest you could be was 35. And it was for young entrepreneurs to think about this new kinds of economies and then do something. And so actually the other day when I was working on this talk, I came across a whole website of young people who are part of this Economy of Francesco movement and have been at the talks and things that have been going on for the past year. And they've started regenerative agriculture. There were two of them, one in, I believe, Brazil, and another one, was it in Italy? So in two different countries, and they're trying to do regenerative agriculture in their areas and make a go of it. And their website was very, upbeat. And I think, so some things like that, I mean, we start small, we start local, as Sister Joyce Ann said, but we have to take hope in what's happening. And I think the economy of Francesco might just be a spark, that might inspire some new initiatives. And young people there's just something about being young where you kind of just want to charge in there. As we get a little older, we're more cautious or whatever. I think let the young, I'd say, let's encourage all of these kinds of initiatives, and educate the young people to feel empowered to take on these things too. So maybe the economy of Francesco will make some changes in actual ecological economics. Might be worth following anyway, to see what's coming out of those meetings.
Yeah, great question. Thank you. This does bring us to the end of our time. Sister Damien Marie, thank you so much for your presentation, and the rich conversation that followed.
Yeah, thank you all for your questions.
I'm going to close our time with a prayer. Actually, it's the hymn setting of Psalm 19 by the words by Timothy Dudley Smith. Well, the words are the word of God, but arranged by Timothy Dudley Smith, but echoing what Sister had brought up earlier about reading the book of creation. So we'll close our time with this poetic setting of Psalm 19. In the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen. The stars declare God's glory, the vault of heaven springs, mute witness of the Master's hand in all created things, and through the silences of space, their soundless music sings. The dawn returns in splendor, the heavens burn and blaze, the rising sun renews the race that measures all our days and writes in fire across the skies God's majesty and praise. So shine the Lord's commandments to make the simple wise, more sweet than honey to the taste, more rich than any prize, a law of love within our heart, a light before our eyes. So order to this life of mine, directed all my days, the meditations of my heart be innocence and praise, my rock and my redeeming Lord, in all my words and ways. Amen. In the name of the Father, Son, Holy Spirit. Thank you all for attending. Thank you again, Sister Damien Marie. Have a good night, everyone.
Thank you. It was nice to meet you all.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mark.
You're welcome.